This dramatic camera gun footage shows an RAF Hurricane being shot at during a Battle of Britain dogfight in September 1940. Nothing unusual in that, you might think, but this camera gun was installed in an RAF Spitfire. So why is a Spitfire attacking a Hurricane? Did the pilot survive? The wing leader team set out to find the answers. So where do we start? Well, first things first, how do we know it's a Hurricane? Well, that's an easy one. If you look at the aircraft, you can see that it has a central radiator under the fuselage, whereas both the ME-109 and Spitfire had their radiators under the wings. And how do we know that it was a Spitfire taking the film? Well, as with most camera gun sequences, there is an information board at the start which tells us some essential details. In this case, we see it's Sergeant Feary of 609 Squadron on the 26th of September 1940. It describes the target as a Heinkel 111 as that's what he's shooting at in the beginning of the sequence. So how can it be possible for an experienced Spitfire pilot to shoot at what is clearly a Hurricane? Well, you have to remember that you're not seeing exactly what the pilot saw. The camera gun, in fact, had a much better view. Camera guns were first fitted to Spitfires before the war for training purposes. Originally they were bolted to the upper surfaces of the wings as seen here, but as the Spitfire went into war, the camera was repositioned into the port wing route as seen on this 616 Squadron example. Not many Spitfires actually carried the cameras during the battle, so this is quite a rare photo showing the port uncovered. Now compare the camera lens's view with that of the pilot. He is looking through a 2-inch thick piece of armoured glass with thick frames each side and a gun sight in front of it. Add a bit of oil from the engine and his view is far worse than what we are seeing on film. Also, if we look again at the film, we can see that the Hurricane was flying almost directly into the sun, which would also add to the distortion of vision through the windscreen. And to be fair to Alan Feary, he appears to fire off a couple of short bursts and then turns away, probably realising that it is, in fact, a Hurricane that has just appeared in his gun sight. So hopefully the Hurricane pilot survived. But how can we find out his identity? Well, the first place to look is in the 609 Squadron Operations Record Book. This shows us that Alan Feary only flew once that day in Spitfire X4-234 from 1600 to 1735. So we know the film was shot during those hours. Then, if we look at 609 Squadron's intelligence report for that day, we see that the squadron took part in a big battle over Southampton as German bombers were attacking the Spitfire factories there. A closer look shows Alan Feary was flying as Yellow 3, and significantly he didn't file a combat report. He just reported having inconclusive engagements with both bombers and fighters. And just below that, just for confirmation, the report tells us that Cinegun films were taken by Darley, Bisbee, Feary and Agazarian. So now we need to check which Hurricane squadrons were in the air at the same time. According to the RAF records, 5 Hurricane squadrons took part in this combat: 238, 303, 229, 213 and 607. Unfortunately, that's a lot of combat reports, so let's see if we can narrow it down a bit. This is an enhanced still of the Hurricane under attack, and if you look very carefully behind the roundel you can see 2 top flat lines of code letters. So if we look at the 5 squadrons' code letters, VK, AK, UP, RF and RE, it can only be the last 2, which are 303 and 229 squadrons, both based at Northolt. Now this rang a slight bell with me because I'd done quite a bit of research into 303 Squadron for a previous book. I seem to remember that they mentioned that they had been attacked by Spitfires during this period. So anyway, I looked in the ORB to find out who was flying on that day. I read their combat reports and one of them immediately jumped out, that of Athol Forbes. See what you think.
As I broke away, I looked in the mirror and saw a trail of white smoke, apparently coming from my machine. Thinking I might be on fire, I prepared to bail out, but as no flames appeared, I did a tight turn and found that the smoke had ceased. I found afterwards that an explosive bullet had opened up my port wing, about a foot from the tip, leaving a jagged piece of metal sticking up, and I assumed that the white smoke was due to condensation caused by the jagged metal in the dive.
Now then, white smoke coming from a hole a foot inside the port wingtip. Let's watch that footage again. At the very end of the sequence, a puff of smoke appears just before a flash of light near the wingtip. This flash of light could be the jagged metal reflecting the sun through the hole in the wing. Smoke then streams back from a point about 1 foot in from the wingtip, exactly as described by the pilot. And if you're still not convinced, listen to the last line of the combat report.
By the time I had finished investigating the white smoke, the enemy formation was breaking up and was at some distance. I was attacked by 2 Spitfires, and after evading them, it was too late, and I had to return to Northolt.
So there you go. Not only did the Hurricane pilot survive the encounter, he actually wrote about it quite nonchalantly in his combat report. One final interesting thing was that we actually found a photo of Athol Forbes taken just an hour or so before he was shot at in his Hurricane. King George VI paid a visit to Northolt on that day to meet the pilots of 303 and 229 squadrons. In this photo we can see Athol Forbes shaking hands with the King. Note that the pilots are wearing their flying clothing as they were on standby to scramble at any time. It turned out to be a great day for the squadron, claiming 13 enemy aircraft destroyed without loss. Sadly, the following day the tables were turned and 2 pilots were killed in action, including the man standing next in line to Forbes, Ludwik Paszkiewicz. The man standing next to him, Valerian Jacques, was also shot down but survived with severe burns. Such was the life for the few in the summer of 1940. And so Alan Feary, the 609 Squadron Spitfire pilot, could be comforted in the knowledge that his short burst of fire at the passing Hurricane did no harm. Sadly, he never got to find out. Less than 2 weeks later, Feary's Spitfire was hit by an Me-109 in combat over Weymouth. Staying with his crippled aircraft as long as he could, he bailed out too low and was killed when his parachute failed to open properly. He was 28 years old.